Please rewind this cassette.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse has been out for a while now, and despite near universal critical praise, the film seems to be an only modest box office success. I think part of this has to do with its different animation style, one that doesn't blend in with what we typically see from DreamWorks or Disney. I guess some could blame it on the marketing and too many Spider films coming out close together. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the movie's a bomb, because it isn't. I'm just curious as to why this film didn't catch on considering its level of craft and the hype around it within the industry. This was the pet project of Phil Lord and Chris Miller. You know, those guys that got fired from Solo after they had directed 4 successful movies previously. After seeing this movie, I once again have to say that I think Disney should have just went with their original cut and saved themselves some money. Now, they didn't direct this one, but Phil Lord did have a major hand in the writing, and I think their stamp's all over it. Into the Spider-Verse follows Miles Morales, who might be well known to comic book fans, but probably more obscure to mainstream audiences who just follow the movies. However, one of the more pleasant things about this movie is that we get several Spider characters. The movie starts with Peter Parker talking about how awesome he is and how nobody else in the world is like him. Voiced by the always charming Chris Pine, this version of Peter Parker is both arrogant and likable. The filmmakers play with this opening scene in different ways when a new Spider character is introduced, and it's one of the more clever bits in the movie. Miles stumbles into a fight between Spider-Man and the Kingpin, who is trying to open a portal to alternate dimensions. The results of this set piece are both shocking and exciting as it introduces us to a Spider-Man universe that we haven't seen yet on the big screen. One thing that really impressed me was how such a complex plot stays coherent throughout. It sort of reminded me of Days of Future Past. The filmmakers keep adding new layers, but they never forget to focus on character moments. The first half of this movie is a real treat, as the hip-hop soundtrack and overall design of this world keeps your eyes and ears engaged. It took me a while to get adjusted to the kinetic energy of everything going on, but it got better for me as the film went on. I remember as soon as the first minute of the film started and just the music and everything popped out at you, I was like, Jesus Christ! I really liked the alternate version of Peter Parker, one that's older and out of shape, a Peter that has given up and lost everything he ever cared about. His relationship with Miles is the highlight of the movie, as watching them both grow together has a pathos that you don't see in many superhero films. This is an above-average animated feature, one that is willing to experiment and get surreal. The only movies I could compare this to is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World or the Speed Racer movie, but it's still its own thing. See, the idea is to create the feeling of reading a comic book, and shots play out like panels. The meta aspects of this movie remind some of Deadpool, but I think it's got a flavor of its own. Now, having said all that, I'm not sure I like the second half as much as the first half of this movie. I feel like the screenplay became much more contrived, and perhaps they had too many characters. Listen, I love Spider-Ham and Spider-Man Noir, but they almost have zero development because they are introduced so late into the movie. If the strength of the narrative came from Peter Parker and Miles' relationship, they take away from that by forcing in so many new things. See, with so many side characters and there not being any time to give anyone a true arc, the movie overall suffers because even though you're loving one storyline and the other storyline's interesting, I don't think it all meshes together perfectly. I think it's a little sloppy in that transition. It's always entertaining, but that doesn't mean that the writing's always sound. Now, I get the idea that this movie's ultimately trying to say that anybody can be Spider-Man. And that's always been one of the great things about that character. See, his mask is designed in such a way that it allows the reader to project themselves onto the character. It's always hard to feel like one could be Thor, Captain America, Tony Stark, and so on. But Peter Parker has always felt the most human out of any superhero. His rogues gallery is as good as Batman's, but Peter isn't rich or always prepared for every situation he gets into. Spider-Man makes mistakes, and his struggles to find balance in his everyday life has remained compelling for decades. How can you save the city when you're worried about trying to keep a strong relationship with your girlfriend or friends? See, Spider-Man struggles in the same way we all do when work and life can never find proper balance. Are we happier when we find purpose in our careers, or when we can grow the intimacy with the ones we love? In what part of your life can you be more present? Now, I've often said I think Spider-Man has the best costume design of all time. I think that Peter Parker's easily the best protagonist of any superhero comic, and I just think overall Spider-Man's energy and flair is just so universal and powerful. I found Miles to be extremely likable in this movie, and it honestly surprised me, and I love the vocal performance from Shaolin Fantastic. In fact, all the voice acting is fantastic. Johnson's Parker feels fresh, and Nick Cage shows he's got a real acumen for this sort of thing. There's plenty of action scenes, most of them fantastic. They sort of reminded me of stuff done by Genndy Tartakovsky, the guy behind Samurai Jack and Dexter's Laboratory. The final 20 minutes is beautiful in just how phantasmagorical it is. There's a lot of stuff to like here, but I'm not as in love with this movie as others. As I said before, the second half isn't as tight for me. There's one storyline involving Miles' uncle that is so underdeveloped and forced it took a lot of weight out of the movie for me. Sometimes you can truly have too much of a good thing, and I think this movie is a perfect example of that. With so many good things being tossed into one package, the filmmakers have a hard time giving everything the detail it deserves, and I think they loved everything they were doing so much they didn't know what to cut. This isn't to say that the movie doesn't work, because it most certainly does. But I'm wondering if I would have liked this movie more had it cut some of the fat and saved some of this stuff for sequels. I was enjoying the stuff with Miles' family so much, and I simply wanted more of it. I think if it had just focused on the relationship with Peter Parker and Miles' family and let all that stuff get developed more and spend more time on that stuff, and maybe even cut the other Spider-Man characters out of the movie, it might have been a better film ultimately. Now, I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people out there because part of the entertainment value of this is to see so many Spider-Men together, but it's really not that big of a part of the movie. I mean, it comes in very late, and really when they're all together, that's only a few scenes. This movie does have a big heart, though. Good humor. And its message is one that's really important for kids. I just don't think it's the masterpiece that many critics have claimed it is. The screenplay finds a lot of shortcuts to get to the places it wants to go, but at the cost of the film's early cleverness. Having said all that, I love the energy of this thing. The aesthetics, music, and pacing are all so well done that it helps the movie overcome a lot of its flaws. This is one of the better superhero films of recent years. And at its best, I think it shows us how unlimited the genre is. A lot of people are going to compare this to the Lego Batman movie, but I like this a bit more overall, and I just thought overall it was a lot smarter. Right now, it's the frontrunner for the Oscar, and I hope people who missed this give it a second chance on home video. Some people have called this the best Spider-Man movie ever made, and I could see myself feeling that same way if it holds up to repeat viewings. But as of right now, it's more in the second or third spot. Still, I highly recommend this film. I think this thing was really fresh. I think this thing was needed. I was so surprised. I had no expectations for this movie. The trailers I didn't really like that much. Then I started reading the reviews and I was like, oh, holy shit, maybe this will be pretty good. And then I went to go see it in the theater and I was honestly just surprised throughout the whole thing. The audience loved it. I think the word of mouth is very strong. Everyone I've talked to in my life who's seen it, after a few weeks after it came out are all talking about how much they enjoyed it. It was just so nice to see something different in animation. Some people might be put off by the frame rate, which is done intentionally to give a feel of a comic book, and it did take me a while to get used to it. I did think it was a little odd, but overall I think it was probably the best choice artistically. Ultimately, you just end up caring about the characters enough to make the ending emotional. You end up enjoying the action scenes enough, even if there's maybe too many action scenes sometimes. And all of the new interpretations of the villains in Spider-Man's catalog are really great. I especially like Dr. Octopus in this. And some of the best moments in the movie honestly give you the feeling of what it's like to go see an Avengers film when all the Spider characters are together. There's that, just that energy that comes from when you have superheroes playing off of each other. In many ways, this is kind of an ultimate comic book movie, but I think because of that they went just swinging for the fences, that they went to make like the ultimate Spider-Man movie, that not everything was going to be perfect. Still, it's pretty damn good, and sometimes that's just good enough. Sort of like Spider-Man. He's never perfect, but he's just good enough. I give Into the Spider-Verse a solid 8 out of 10, and it'll probably make my top 10 list at the end of the year.